And I'm just going to be totally honest with you. It irks me. It bothers me. It aggravates me to no end how anyone could be listed on a transplant program's list, could be waiting hopefully for that transplant, and then suddenly they're notified out of the blue that their transplant program is being shut down. They're being basically thrown out to the wolves, left high and dry, and there's no real where to turn, okay? I don't understand how that happened. I don't understand how we've gotten to that, but I know it's a problem. Hey folks, welcome to the Transplant Helper. Today, my name is Jim Merle. Today we're going to be discussing yet another one of those topics that unfortunately I wish we didn't have to discuss. And that is the topic that's come up recently in the news about certain transplant centers and programs around the country that are either being suspended and or shut down for one reason or another. Now, if you remember at the time of this video, back about 6 to 8 weeks, and depending on when you watch it, it could be farther out than that, but there was recently one of the transplant centers out in Houston, Texas, that had its heart program shut down, at least temporarily suspended, because of some wrongful deaths. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of that. I don't even know how it's going to work out, but the accusation was that there were several people that had had transplants there at that center and seemingly should have done great, but after surgery, something went wrong that they don't understand, no one could explain, and these patients died. And so I don't know if someone personally filed lawsuits. I don't know how that happened, but basically someone made accusation and the center was shut down. Now, there's a few different sides of this coin. On the one hand, we need to be constantly praying for the families involved to lose a loved one, and especially to lose a loved one under some, funny circumstances or mysterious circumstances. It's awful. So the families need our prayers. On the other hand of that, I want to applaud whoever it was that took the initiative, whatever governmental group, or I don't know who it was, but whoever took the initiative to put this program on pause, to suspend it while these things were investigated. Because if there's really something going on, no one needs to be susceptible to that. It needs to be a top-notch program. To be a transplant program anywhere in the country, you need to have top-notch staff, top-notch facilities, top-notch care. Everything needs to be at its best. And if it can't meet those standards, it doesn't need to exist, okay? As unfortunate as it is, and as many of transplant centers as we really need around here, so many of us can go more local, it doesn't need to exist. But that's not really the discussion. I'm not really talking about Houston. I'm not pitching my opinion on that. I will say as a whole, though, keep in mind that transplant centers are that. They're transplant centers. We're not talking about people who had tonsils removed and appendix removed and, other more minor surgeries done who died from that. We're talking about people who died after, not necessarily a result, but after transplant. Transplant is a big, big deal, okay? So you're not going to have a 100% success rate at transplant, and there are going to be some who pass. That's just the nature of the beast, okay? And again, that's not to credit the Houston Hospital. That's just to balance things out. Now, with that said, what we're talking about today is not really based on that situation. It's based on this recent article, which I got on my phone right here, that came out in one of the CNN, I can't hardly say that, but one of the CNN affiliates, and it's related to this subject. Here's the headline, at least. They were waiting on organ transplant, and their program shut down, okay? And I'm going to put this up here. You can see it, maybe see it in the screen a little bit. I'm going to link it in the description of this video below in just a few minutes, so you can go ahead and read this whole article for yourself, at least as long as you can find it on the internet. You can read it, but basically that headline, they were waiting for organ transplant center, then their program shut down. It's not about a program being suspended. It's not about a program being shut down as far as some outside group shut the program down. It's not even, supposedly, according to the article, not about a transplant center who wasn't having the best results and decided to retire their program. No. What the article goes on to say is that this transplant center, which is Porter Adventist Hospital in Denver, Colorado, decided to temporarily shut down their transplant program because they had quote-unquote staffing issues, okay? Staffing issues. Now, what in the world is that? We're going to talk about that in a moment. Before we get that far, the article goes on to tell us here that there are some 232 patients listed on their transplant waiting list at the Porter Adventist Hospital. Of course, listed for UNOS, United Network for Organ Sharing, but listed there at that particular center. And it's those 232 patients that are really going to become, in some senses, a victim of this, because as they decided to shut their program down, these 232 people are left out high and dry. So before I go any farther, let me just say, how can that happen? How is it that you can be hopeful of a situation, that you can be, looking forward to transplant? You're listed, you've been through all the red tape, and here you are, and then suddenly your center notifies you that you're being shut down. And by the way, you can read in the article that not all, I'm sure, but some of the patients claim to have not been notified by a meeting with a doctor. They claim to have been notified by reading the same news story. So can you imagine waking up one morning on the transplant list at any given center, and as this person reports, a friend of theirs texts them this article, and they read to find out their program is being shut down? That's got to be terrible, okay? It's a bad situation. And again, they're closing this particular program because they say they need to be restaffed. Now, how does that interpret to me? I'm not sure exactly what that's going to end up meaning, but to me, that's talking about their staff, just as it sounds. Their doctors, their nurses, their coordinators, their surgeons. Maybe they need to restaff. They claim they've had some vacancies come up over the last few years, holes that they need to fill, and they're just stopping the program for 6 to 12 months to try to fill those. That may be the case. Let me tell you this example. At UAB Hospital, I don't know your transplant center particularly, but it's probably much the same. At UAB Hospital, where I was transplanted, the staffing there is very, very specialized. Obviously, the surgeons are transplant surgeons. The doctors are transplant / whatever organ failure related specialists. But all the way down to the coordinators are specially trained, and even the nurses on the floor. Where I was typically always placed pre and post transplant was either in CCU or HTICU, heart transplant intensive care unit, which by the way also services lungs and LVADs as well. Those nurses on those particular floors were very, very specially and highly trained to deal with those situations. Now, could they handle somebody who had their appendix taken out? I'm sure they could, but that's not what they were specially trained for. They were specially trained to deal with transplant patients, pre or post-transplant, depending on the unit. They were specially trained to deal with that. And I'll give you an example of that. One of my greatest nurses I had during that time, his name was Matt. I'll just give his first name. That's his real first name, but his name was Matt. Matt was a great nurse. Many great nurses there on the floor. But Matt was a younger guy. He became a friend of mine. Oftentimes, he was my nurse while I was in the hospital. Matt was the guy who almost always seemed to get the most critical patients. Not that I was one of them. I was his light work. But he used to get very, very critical patients. For example, one of my stays there, I can remember walking down the hall and seeing Matt in the room working behind glass. And he was working with a patient that was on dialysis, that was on already on an LVAD, but on dialysis, on an LVAD, I think even on ECMO. This person had, no joke, 20 IV bags hanging around his bed, an oxygen tent, you name it. This poor person was in that kind of shape, and Matt was the one down there in his room working almost the whole shift day after day after day. And Matt was good, okay? Matt, and as well as any of them, were very skilled. Why? Because they had very, very specialized training. And the beautiful part about that particular story, I can remember seeing this happening over the course of a couple of weeks while I was in the hospital, so was this person. And then I can also remember the day I met that man walking down the hall because he had recovered. Okay, he was given a chance because his doctors, his nurses, all this staff knew what they were doing. That's specialized staffing that ought to be associated with every transplant center. So let me defend this by saying that if the hospital decides and deems that they don't have the specialized staff to deal with this, shut the thing down, okay? Stop what you're doing, recheck. But my arguments come in a few cases. One, on the surface of just that, why were they not restaffing over the past of this supposed several years they were losing the staff? It's your job. If you're the CEO or CFO or I don't know what your title is of the hospital, the head of the transplant program, it's your job, ma'am, it's your job, sir, to be looking and constantly recruiting staff members to be a part of that program. There's going to be some turnover. There are some doctors at UAB right now that weren't there when I started. There are some nurses that weren't there when I started, but they've been constantly replacing that staff with qualified staff. Why was this Porter Adventist Hospital not doing that? Why was that not happening? You should not have to shut your doors and turn people away to restaff. Now, in addition to that, if you knew this was coming over the course of several years, and I'm quoting some of the article there, if you knew this was coming, why weren't you restaffing? And if so, if you knew that it was going to take a shutdown to restaff, that's fine. But why weren't you talking to your patients? Why weren't you talking to your listees, those who were on your transplant list, and communicating to them that, yes, we're going to have to do this, and at some point, you may have to go to a different transplant center? And why couldn't you treat this system as good as a fast food restaurant, man? We've had McDonald's shut down around here not too long ago, and here's what they did. They closed for remodeling, for restaffing, but the way they did that was they put a sign in front of the building and said, effective so-and-so date will be closed for remodeling. And I can remember going to that McDonald's on the day that it closed, going through the drive-thru, and I can remember, although there was a person standing in the drive-thru who said, you are the last customer, they still served the last customer. Now, this is not apples for apples. I get that, okay? Fast food restaurant's not a hospital, but the principle can apply, folks. You've got 232 people on your list at your hospital. Why can't you service those people? Why can't you put enough of a staff together to at least tell those people, look, I want to offer you the service that we will complete this. We'll carry you through this process if we can. But while we do that, anybody who wants to go to another center, we'll help you do that and kind of do a dual thing. And then at some point, because you've not accepted any new patients on the list, at some point, now you can close your program temporarily, fix it, make it right, and then re-implement it later. Why did that not happen? Why is it not happening? You know, I understand. I'm just a peon, a nobody. I'm a heart transplant recipient. I've been there. I'm doing that. I'm here on YouTube ranting right now. I get that. I'm a nobody. But I want someone to answer, not to me. You don't owe me an explanation. I don't have anything to do with it. But I want someone to answer these poor 232 people why they weren't notified earlier, why there was not a real plan put into place to help to carry them through the process and to make things easy for them, and why they're being basically their best option right now is we'll help you find somewhere else to go. We'll send your records. Man, there's somebody in Denver, Colorado who lives 15 minutes from your hospital, who has always lived 15 minutes from your hospital, who either doesn't want to nor can they afford to go to the next nearest transplant center or to be picked and chosen like many are having to be done today and flown to California to live for a year to try to get an organ. It's just a bad thing. I don't know any other way to put it. Now, am I being completely fair in this and balanced? Probably not. I'm pretty passionate about it, as you can tell. But I do know that the solution to fixing a transplant program is not just, we'll put a deadbolt on the doors and turn everybody away. That's not it. That is not the way to conduct business. And so I hope and pray for the people involved that a solution is found, and it's found quickly, and that the people involved, whether they get to stay at your facility or they have to move on, I hope that when they do, that they receive the organ that they need, that they receive the care that they need, and that they're able to have the life that they want and desire out of this. I apologize for this little bit of a rant. Maybe it's not even made sense, but I do think it's important. Again, this particular article here, let me get it to pop up on my phone. I'll link this down below in the video description, so you can hit that little arrow down there at the corner. It'll expand that, and you can go ahead and click on this. But they were waiting for organ transplant, then their program shut down. How sad that is. I appreciate you joining me today. This is not my typical video, so if you've ever considered watching more videos of mine, probably right now would be the best time. I'll have some over here in the corners beside me, as well as I've often linked some in the descriptions above and below. But anyway, I'm just a guy who's out there living the transplant life, hoping to advocate, educate, and motivate you as a transplant patient. And until next time, please stay stronger, friends.